All right, I'm Amy Baldwin, and I'm here with Lori Hazard, and we're addressing an issue that we can't quite figure out exactly how to call it, what to call it, but I'm calling it going hog wild. So if you listen to our session on loneliness, this would be the exact opposite, right, Lori? Some,
Right.
somebody who is overindulging, overdoing, and when I say overindulging and overdoing, not in the learning process, right? Not well, that could be true too. I guess they're overdoing something and things are out of balance. What do you see students doing when they're kind of overdoing it, especially when they're first year students and they're new to college?
Yeah, I think the motivation for overdoing X in different areas is because they want to belong, they want to be accepted, they want to enjoy themselves. I also think students have this like picture of what they think college is supposed to be. So I can think of a couple of different sort of portraits of students. The one student who is wants to join every club or organization and keep busy, and so they're joining clubs and organizations and making friends and getting over involved. And of course we want students to be involved, but it's hard to balance involvement with academics. And sometimes if students are leading with the social adjustment and not as concerned about the academic adjustment, they could overdo it with joining too many clubs or organizations and keeping too busy being a social butterfly. So I think that's one way of saying going hog wild or overindulging. But then I think of the student who is overindulging in the party scene, right? Depending on what the college or university is like. And I remember years ago a student saying to me, you know, I'm thinking of transferring because he was really looking for what he had seen in the movies of these like fraternities and sororities with big gigantic keg parties, and he wasn't finding it at the institution that I was at the time. And so his picture of what college looked like wasn't matching with Hollywood, seriously. And so
Yeah.
he was trying to overindulge, but wasn't finding the fantasy college experience. So I think students really have to be careful of that in an effort to make friends, maybe engaging in some activities that they might not normally engage in as well.
Do you think,
So it's
yeah, go ahead.
balancing, which is so hard, right? Trying to find the balance, striking the balance between getting involved and having fun, and they should,
Mhm.
but also managing their academics at the same time. So that sort of work hard, play hard.
Yeah, I was gonna say, there I think there are probably a couple of things coming into play. One is maybe they did that stuff in high school. Maybe they were a part of a lot of different clubs and they were able to balance sports and academics and a part-time job and volunteer work. And wouldn't you say that one of the transition issues to college is you really can't go at that pace and have everything stay the same? Would that be fair to
Yeah,
say?
well, I mean, I think because what gets increased and augmented in college is the workload. So the
Right.
time and effort that they have to put into mastering their course material in college is going to be more hours, more effort, more time than it was in high school. So they really have to figure out what it's going to take for them to succeed academically in terms of putting X amount of time or hours in, and then what's left for the leisure time or that social time.
Yeah, and you make a good point. I think because I think about this particular student, she didn't that I had. It wasn't the partying that she overindulged in. It was just that she wanted to take 18 hours, which is a lot for a first year student for the first semester. She wanted to
Mhm.
be involved and go to all the events. You know, she's very academic minded, and a high achiever, so she wanted to do that. And then she loved the social piece. She loved making friends and staying up all night talking, and kind of like you were talking about that image of college that we see, that close friendships and lots of time, you know, I don't know what, braiding each other's hair. I don't know what the movies, might depict. And she, was 5 weeks in and she was not sleeping. And
Mhm.
but it was hard for her to say no because she thought because she didn't have to be somewhere from 9 to 3 every day like she did in high school, that she had all these holes to fill. And I think to your point, Lori, you
Mhm.
were saying that, it looks like you've got a lot of holes to fill, especially those first few weeks, but that's not you've got other things that are going to be taking that place. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and I think it's hard to figure out, trying to find the balance. And then you have some students who kind of do the opposite and say, I'm not going to join anything. I want to make sure that I do really well in my academics, but that they don't socially integrate. So it is hard for students to manage figuring out how much time do they need to put into their coursework, and how much time can they sort of spare or spend on their social life, which is important too, to be developing those healthy relationships in college. So striking a balance is one of the biggest challenges for college students. But they don't want to overdo it, right?
Right. Because they won't be there long if they do.
Right.
So if you were to give some advice to parents who already know that they have a wild child who's going to want to be involved, hyper involved, what would you tell them? What kind of conversations should they be having with their student about that?
I mean, if we really want to get concrete, right? If we think students are in classes about 3 hours a day, they should probably be spending about 4 or 5 hours, maybe 6 outside of class, depending on the demands of their classes. So if we've got that 8 hours of doing coursework, and then students are sleeping for 8 hours. This is my 888 formula, right? Students are sleeping for 8 hours, give or take. Then they have 8 hours of leisure time. So what are they going to do with that leisure time? Are they working a part-time job? Are they a student athlete? Are they going to get involved in clubs or organizations? So they can kind of conceptualize that 888 formula, right? 8 hours of schoolwork, 8 hours of sleep, and then 8 hours of leisure time. But maybe it's not all leisure time because they have to work a part-time job.
Right.
So just trying to think about let's talk about how we're going to balance this. And maybe it's a good idea to just try out 1 or 2 clubs that first semester, and see how that goes.
Yeah.
Start out small and then bite off bigger chunks as you find success in your classes.
Yeah. And get more comfortable. And that goes, I think, for, not just social organizations or even volunteer organizations, but also, looking for a work or part-time job.
Work study job.
Yeah. Cause I'll have students go, I've got this time on the weekends. So, I feel like I need to be doing something productive. But this could be, for a lot of different activities or things that are going to fill up the time. So would you encourage that? I love the 888, and my students do too, because it gives them something concrete. So that's a great way to frame it, to say, hey, just be mindful of when you're adding things that you're not, overdoing. You're not putting in more than 24 hours worth of stuff to do. And that. And then would you encourage them to also, the parents, to check in with their student like every few weeks to say, how are you managing everything? Are you feeling overwhelmed?
Yeah, I feel like during the first year I might do a weekly check-in because,
Okay.
the term or semester can go by so quickly. So if a parent waits 3 or 4 weeks to check in, the student's approaching maybe their first test or quiz. So they might want to do a weekly check-in at the beginning and then pull back on that.
Yeah. And you make a good point about kind of the workload over a semester. So I'll have students who they haven't gotten to the first test yet. And so they're like, I've got all this time, I'm going to fill it with things that are kind of hard to drop. And a job is one of them. They don't realize, like, week 6, 7, 8, things are going to get more intense. And then you're going to have another intensity, perhaps near the last part of the semester, if not the whole rest of the semester. So, it's never going to be, the same. There'll be times that are just really crazy busy, even with just coursework.
Yeah, I try to get students and parents to think about that sort of trajectory of the semester, where week 3 is when they're really going to be maybe starting feeling homesick. Around week 3 or 4, that's really when they're going to have to sort of reconcile their time and behavior management at week 3 or 4, once they get adjusted to their classes. And then week 6, you're approaching midterms, right? Then week 9, you're reconcile, how did I do on my midterms? And am I going to have to step it up and augment what I was doing, or am I in a good, rhythm? And then week 12, they're ramping up for final. So I feel like thinking of the semester in those 3-week increments can be helpful for parents and students.
To kind of just, stay on top of, how things are changing. I would even argue that, weeks 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, if
Yeah.
you're on a semester system, because can be really intense because group projects might be assigned,
Final papers.
final papers, and then every fall semester, students are kind of a little surprised by the tests that they have to take before the final. Like they'll have
Right.
tests the week before a final, and they're like,
Yes.
I'm so confused. I'm having to now put a lot of studying in for this one test, and also have to study for finals. So
Yeah, that's a really good point.
it can get quite intense. So so that balance needs to be there, and great if your student is excited and wants to do everything, but this may be a good opportunity to kind of help them learn how to pull themselves back a little bit
For sure.
until they feel a little bit better. Well, thank you, Lori. Appreciate it.